people. At the moment, we're working with difficult technology, having some problems sharing a screen. Let's see if it works this time. The difficulty is that when I share a screen, I seem to lose sound for no apparent reason that I can think of. Just praying, can you still hear me? I see Philippa can hear me now. In a few minutes, once I hit share screen, please tell me that this is working. Okay, now can you hear me? That is the question. You can. Wonderful, it works. Are you seeing a screen that says working with difficult people? If so, wow, brilliant. Well, this is what wasn't working just 5 minutes ago. Thanks everyone for helping us out here. I'm just going to start the recording if you bear with me. No sound, can't hear. It's fine, John, but a little blurred. Are you hearing? Okay, the sound has disappeared. No sound. Okay, no sound. Yes, sound? How weird. It seems to come and go. Right, this is very, very strange. Some of you are getting sound and some of you are not. Okay. Logging back in, yeah, I've logged in about 7 times, Mary, unfortunately. Yeah, there's too many people that don't have sound. Okay, I think I may have to accept defeat today, folks. Let's see how we go. What I will do is this. We will, I'm going to go ahead because some of you seem to have success with this, and I'm going to separately record. Okay, some of you are in luck. I'm going to separately record another version of the webinar on a different platform, and we'll send a revised version of it or a rescheduled version, whatever the case may be. Not sure yet, but at least we'll make another arrangement. So if you're having difficulty with sound, etc., then let's see what happens. Okay, enough of that. There's working with difficult people and there's working with difficult technology. In this case, it's called Demio. Not highly recommended after this fiasco. I'm going back to GoToWebinar. Okay, let's make a start. It's 4 minutes in. What I will do, just for the purposes of capturing this, I'm going to make a local copy in the hope that someday this might be useful. Bear with me 1 second. Coming up. Hold the line, caller. Just check I got the right microphone. Yes, we do. And go. Welcome everyone to Working with Difficult People. Please use the chat box to submit questions as we go, and I will do my best to respond to them as they come in. Okay, what are we dealing with? Well, there's quite a lot of damage caused by difficult people. I've lost count of how many coaching hours have been spent working with people on the practical difficulties of what I call the level 1 difficulties here, the practical day-to-day difficulties of getting paid, the hours lost in sleepless nights because of the way that people behave as bosses or as colleagues, as the case may be. Let's call them the level 1, and you're all familiar with them. I'm sure we've all had the problem of that awkward boss, the person who keeps changing requirements, the person who just is a heart sink. When we look at the calendar, we find them in it. But perhaps the more serious damage is level 2, which is often they take so much energy dealing with these that we simply don't have the time to develop. We simply don't have the time to to find better clients or find better jobs or find better futures, as the case might be. So that loss of energy, the sheer amount of time and headspace that these difficult people get often keep us a prisoner of them. And there are some who would say that that's deliberate on their part. I don't know if that's 100% true, but it certainly often feels as if it is. I would then say that there's also a level 3 of damage. And the level 3 is the impact that it has on us, the impact it has on our self-worth, the impact it has on our own sense of value. Particularly if you've struggled with a difficult client or a difficult boss for a long period of time, you actually begin to wonder if you deserve anything better. And this is the most serious form of damage done by these people. In the run-up to today, I've suggested there's 4 types we're going to look at. There's not only 4 types, but there's 4 types that show up in recurring way. The narcissist, the manipulator, the aggressor, and the saboteur. And the first thing we're going to do is give you a chance to recognize these. And we will, as mentioned in the run-up to the webinar, distinguish between those who are difficult from those who are simply demanding. Because there are many demanding clients or bosses we've had over the years, but with hindsight, we actually come to appreciate our involvement with them. Not so with the difficult ones. We're going to talk, obviously, about how to protect your self-worth when you're in the middle of that tsunami. And we'll go on to deal with some practical tips as they relate to these 4 types. Played out a little bit differently depending on whether they're your boss, your client, your colleague, or indeed your employee or team member. And obviously we'll round off a little bit with this topic of inner strength, because inner strength becomes really important when we're dealing with difficult types. Yes, I recognize that we can also contribute to difficult situations. I am not saying ever that we don't have to look at ourselves in all of this. But there are lots of difficult people out there. No matter how smart you are at screening them out, you're going to end up getting some of them. That's a fact. So while we recognize that we ourselves can contribute to difficult situations, while we recognize and we often look back at saying, maybe I should have spotted this earlier. Sure, we can take that learning. The recognition is there, but we're still left with how to deal with them. And that's what today is about. Today is not a webinar about introspection. It is actually about the practicalities of dealing with difficult people. That said, I cannot advise on a specific situation. If you want to get some help with that, please arrange a call with me, because there are always complexities in specific situations that cannot be addressed on a webinar. But I do hope that at the very least, this webinar will help you to shorten the suffering or limit the suffering, as the case may be, and maybe to improve your decision making about what you'd like to do about that. Self-worth is a prerequisite, but it's also, to some degree, it's a result. When we have self-worth, then we are, yes, we're better able to deal with the situation, but also when we deal with these situations, it helps self-worth to grow as well. So there's a yin-yang going on here. Okay, let's begin with the first one. Quick check on technology. I see one note on choppy sound. Hopefully most of you are catching this, and we are going to do a recording as well. Type 1, narcissist. The narcissist who loves the limelight. In fact, for the narcissist, they are the world. There are some pretty glowing examples of them on the world stage at the moment. I'm not going to say any more about that. But there is no shortage of narcissists out there. In fact, there's a fairly solid piece of research that's been going on since the 80s that pretty much charts the growth of narcissism right across the population by a steady 1 to 2% per year. And it's been going on now for quite a few years. We are simply living in a more and more narcissistic world. I think it's a mistake to blame social media for that, and it's certainly a mistake to be blaming millennials for that. In some ways, social media is perhaps a product of our narcissism. It's been going on for quite a while. The problem with, the giveaway for the narcissist, how do you spot them? They're always talking about themselves. Their favorite words are I, me, and my, or name dropping to the in the same vein. So they like to talk about who they know. They like to talk about how important they are. They find subtle ways to bring the conversation back to them all the time. They crave attention. They need that limelight that's in that picture in front. They have, if they're left for even a few hours without that level of attention, they will do something in order to bring the attention back to them. The problem that gives to you is they just don't see data that relates to other people. So that there is a lack of empathy, there is a lack of compassion, primarily because they don't see you at all. You are simply a passenger in their ego trip. Whether they be client or boss or colleague or friend, you are simply a passenger in their ego trip. Your existence is simply as a supporting cast, an obscure member of the audience in that image in front of you, because everything comes back to the narcissist. Trying to teach a narcissist compassion or trying to teach narcissists empathy is a losing game. Don't waste your time with it. It just doesn't work. Second type, a bit different to the narcissist, is the manipulator. The manipulator is a game player. On the surface, they can be very friendly. They can even demonstrate great listening skills and great skills around empathy. They're very good on things like flattery. They make you feel good by being around them, at least initially. They adapt their language and even their body language and tone of voice. They adapt it quite readily to yours. The manipulator, on the other hand, unlike the narcissist, who is actually driven to get attention, the manipulator is all about is generally driven to win. They're winners. They may not have that tattooed on their forehead, but they want to win, and they will use any technique in the book in order to do so. And unfortunately, that does include deceiving you. It includes making promises and then not delivering them on them. It most certainly includes an awful lot of self-interest. Manipulators tend to be self-interested in the extreme. They're extremely good at telling you what you want to hear. Without doubt, some of them ends up, yes, chameleons, exactly. Pretty much as just mentioned by Paul, they are chameleons. They adapt their language and tone of voice to the person who's in front of them. It's quite fascinating to watch them, actually. If you want to do a study on human nature, just watch a manipulator adapt their style for different people. There's actually quite a lot that can be learned from that, but please don't let it turn you into a manipulator. Third type, very easy to spot. They're pretty loud, as in the image in front of you. They are aggressors. Their talent is diminishing other people. And they may do it by shaming them, they may do it through threats, they may do it through anger. Their language tends to be the language of orders, threats, consequences, if then else type propositions. They crave power. Often they are fear-driven individuals, but they crave power. That's a bit subtly different to the narcissist who craves attention. Obviously, you can have a narcissistic aggressor, of course. All of these can occur in blend. But the narcissist is attention-driven, the aggressor is power-driven. The problem being that they devalue the people around them, sometimes quite consciously, often unconsciously. And here's the odd thing, they can sometimes flip into protector or savior mode, because notice they are power modes as well. So they will often show up as your protector, they'll often show up as your savior. They quite like those roles because of the power trip it gives them. But yes, Kate, I see the truth of that. But they can adopt a savior or protector mode when it suits them. But make no mistake about it, it's the same power trip that lies underneath. This is a flip that's very well known in the context of domestic violence, for example, where the protector or the savior then turns into the aggressor. But we find them in workplaces. We find quite a lot of them in workplaces. You will definitely find them in your client base, unfortunately, because, hey, that's the way the world is. And finally, we have a rather discreet type who are nonetheless problematical, and they are the saboteurs. They tend to work underhand. They tend to exploit vulnerability, either in people or systems, as the case may be. Their key weapons are gossip, fault finding, or bringing up a problem at the last minute when you don't have time to solve it. They're often the person who sits very quietly in the meeting and about 10 minutes to go goes, that's all very well, but how about this? So they torpedo an initiative at the last minute. Often they are quite envious of other people, while the narcissist is driven by attention, while the aggressor is driven by power. The saboteur is often driven by a deep resentment towards themselves in many cases, but very definitely towards others. And the problems they give you, or they give your teams, as the case may be, is they can sabotage you with last minute problems. They can leave you a sense of demotivation and discouragement. And make no mistake about it, they get a secret satisfaction from this type of power. So we are not, of course, saying that every type of difficult person that you would ever have, thank you, Jody, we are not, perfect segue, we are not saying that every aggressor that, that every type of difficult person that we ever get fit into these four. There's lots of other types. There are the clients and bosses who keep changing directions, so you never know where you are with them. You have the type who are never satisfied. You have those who are just lacking in reliability. So they say they're going to do things, but you have to keep following them up as to whether they'll do them. You have the micromanager, often combined with the perfectionist. Then these two types tend to go very well together, but not always. The micromanager or perfectionist is can make a day at work into a living hell. We have the dramatist who just loves drama, who loves theater. They may often, of course, be narcissists, because that's, using drama is very much in the narcissist's toolkit, because it's a great way for them to shine. However, there are those who also can be less narcissistic but still use drama. And coming back to Jodie's question, indeed, we can have a mix of types, not limited to the four I've described above. I've simply selected those four because they're the ones that crop up in a recurring way on the coaching calls I've been doing over the last 20 years. Because many of the difficulties that people have in business actually relate to difficult people. Now, not always, because sometimes we have demanding people, and I'd really like to get clear on this distinction, because sometimes we can mix up the two. In a resentment towards a demanding boss, for example, we can call them a difficult boss. Well, there is a distinction. I'm just going to put it all on the screen so you can read it as I chat through it. Demanding people, let's take the boss as an example. A demanding boss will set ambitious goals, or a demanding client might well have ambitious goals. They are quite likely to keep you accountable for them. They have phenomenal memory. They can obviously, particularly if they are super organized, they can appear pretty relentless. But deep down, they are people of values. They are people of integrity. They're generally not just self-preoccupied, but they're focused on making the company a success, or making the team a success, or making the project a success. They can be quite machine-like in their way of doing that, or maybe use drama or whatever in doing it. However, there's a difference of intent between demanding people and difficult people. Difficult people, on the other hand, may well possess those characteristics. However, they're generally totally lacking in empathy or compassion. They are quite capable consciously or unconsciously, of embarrassing people publicly. Some enjoy creating insecurity and diminishing people, and therefore their interest is self-interest. And that basic lack of respect, and very often that lack of integrity, usually involving lying, is one of another key weapon that's not on the slide, but pretty much used all the time. Lying would be one of the things that would shift somebody from the demanding column into the difficult column. So if you're having a difficult boss or a difficult client at the moment, perhaps have a think, are they difficult or are they demanding? Because if they're demanding, they can be good for you. Most of us look back on clients or bosses that we had at some point, and we went, okay, working with them every day wasn't a joy, perhaps, but it did actually raise my game, or it did enhance my performance, or it did make me reach for a level that I didn't know was possible before. That's generally the positive legacy of demanding people. Sometimes it's good if we encounter them in early career because we have the benefits later on. Difficult people, on the other hand, do not leave us with that legacy. They leave us with a negative legacy of not just resentment, but somehow feeling diminished by working with them. Great question from Susan. Can the role change with the situation? Roles can, but people rarely do. If people are aggressive or are narcissistic, they're probably like that in their personal lives as well as in their work lives. In my experience, at least, the characteristics of a person is rarely situational. On the contrary, they tend to carry those same characteristics into friendship as much as they do into the workplace. Which is why it's really important that you protect yourself from the damage. And this is why self-worth is super important. That, number one, that means choosing which battles you're going to fight. You're not going to be able to fix every difficult person. That's just the way it is. No matter how you try, no matter how much you might like to, there'll be certain types that it's just better off not to fight that battle. Because if you require yourself to fight every battle, your self-worth will be on the line every day. And that makes life really, really, really hard for you. We're going to be talking about boundaries, and one key boundary is being able to meet people eye to eye. Self-worth is really important in this context. There's a story in the book, in the Self-Worth Safari, about somebody who worked with a bullying boss. And one of the things she was able to do is to meet him eye to eye until the situation improved. And with that comes the setting of boundaries, usually setting them earlier rather than later, because the difficulty is not so much that we don't set boundaries, is we tend to set them too late. We should have set them earlier on. You know, for example, stating what you're not okay with. That's a boundary. Most of us would not be okay with physical violence. Well, are we okay with shouting? Why should we not have a boundary around being shouted at, whether in public or in private? There is simply no reason in the workplace to be shouted at. And therefore, being able to state calmly what you're not okay with is a good example of a boundary. However, yet again, we need to be careful that we don't make boundary setting essential for self-worth. Now, there's an argument that it is. Brené Brown, amongst others, have said that those who are the most compassionate are also the most boundaried. I do agree with that. However, we have to be careful that we don't slip into making our self-worth conditional on whether we were successful at setting a boundary. Part of what's important when dealing with difficult people is not to slip into self-reproach when somehow you are not able to, for example, set a boundary in the way you'd have liked. The core of self-worth is unconditional friendship with yourself, even when you've not been able to manage the situation. So the sequence here is taking care of ourselves first and taking care of the situation second, in that order. What we often do is we reverse it. We think, when I've taken care of that situation, then I'll be able to take care of myself. It's the other way around. We want to and we need to take very good care of ourselves when we're in that difficult situation, as a result of which we enhance our capacity to deal with the situation. And that means getting very clear when we're protecting our self-worth, getting very clear between what's your issue, what's their issue, and what's your collective issues. For example, if you have been very needy or very desperate, let's pick, let's say you go into a client assignment because you're desperate for the business. Well, your desperation is your issue, not their issue. The fact that they're exploiting that desperation is their issue. The resulting tensions on the project is our issue. Getting very clear about what these are is quite important, because sometimes we make ourselves responsible for the behavior of others. So, somebody is constantly exploiting the scope of the project. We feel we should be able to somehow change them from doing so. Well, no, they are the way they are. What we want to do is detach from many of the ways that they are, and instead actually protect ourselves. And that means, even though we might feel sad or disappointed about a situation, not drifting into self-reproach. Being able to ask for help, super important, particularly with some of the types, as we'll come to in a moment, and throughout the process, right from the moment you recognize you've got a difficult person, prioritizing your own self-care. Right, let's look at the practicalities. I'm watching the clock, trying to watch the chat as well. Please let me know if there's any questions you want me to answer. Let's deal with the difficult boss. And I'm just going to put the first two on the slide here. The first thing we have to decide is the boss a narcissist or a manipulator or an aggressor or a saboteur? So first decision before even reading those, perhaps have to think about, if you're looking at the boss, or if you've got a friend who's in this situation, what have they got? Have they got a narcissist, manipulator, aggressor, saboteur? Or which of them is the closest? Or is it a blend of two? Sure, difficult people often show up as blends. So let's start from the beginning. If it is, I'm going to scroll back for a moment. If it is a narcissist, forget about trying to get the narcissistic boss to understand that you need time off of the weekend, because the narcissist couldn't care less. So any effort you put in trying to teach them empathy or compassion is probably wasted. Trying to explain things to a narcissist about the complexity of your family life or the complexity of your job, they don't care. Their attention, remember, is on them. So therefore your boundaries need to be blunt. It's no, not no because. Start building other relationships. Why? Because the narcissist ain't going to change. If they are narcissistic, they're narcissistic. What you want to do is just detach from their drama. You may still have to sit at the meeting while they tell that war story yet again. You may not be perhaps in a position to interrupt that, as you would if perhaps it was a colleague. So here the tactics are a bit different depending on the situation. But you can at least mentally detach from their drama rather than going into resentment or going into your own drama about their drama. Really, with narcissists, the key thing here is detachment. It runs pretty much right through the piece. Don't bother trying to change them. Don't bother trying to fix them. Wasted energy. The manipulator, different story. Quite a different story, actually. Here, you want to be, first of all, become really clear about your own agenda and requirements, because any vagueness about your requirements will be exploited by manipulators. So be clear about what you want out of the job or out of the project. Be clear about the scope, hence the second bullet about written clarity. Be very wary of future-based promises. So do this and you'll get a super testimonial or whatever. Yeah, right. And just save your mental energy from being sucked into their games. Moving on, the aggressor. Most people say that when you're dealing with aggressors, the first thing you need to do is set clear boundaries. Actually, in practice, this can be a little bit dangerous. It can actually expose you to even more aggression. My advice is, if you're dealing with a difficult boss, or indeed, an aggressive boss, or indeed an aggressive anybody, your first instinct should be to get support and then to set the boundary, in that order. Because in practice, boundary setting, which is all very well in the book or the workshop, but it can actually exacerbate a situation with an aggressor, because they don't take kindly to boundaries. So needful and all, or necessary and all, as the boundary is, perhaps what's most important is to get support first. That could be HR if you're in a company setting, or a colleague, or a team member, or somebody outside. But the first thing to do is enlist some support for yourself. Then you can start getting clear on the boundary. If you can, maintain eye-to-eye contact, and the essence here is calm, clear requests. A bit like the narcissist, there's no point in going into because and justifications and stories and telling them all the detail of the the problem that you fixed, etc. Why? Because they're just not able to absorb that. They don't really care, to be honest. The aggressor is power driven. Kate is asking what sort of support. Depends on the situation, Kate. I mean, if you have a sympathetic HR department that's not just under the aggressor's thumb or control, or worse still, feeding stuff back to them, then of course you can go there. I would suggest find somebody whom you've got a good relationship, a trusted relationship with first, and then decide who you speak to next. The support might not just come from one person, and there are many reasons why it just cannot come from HR. Finally, the saboteur. The saboteur, just be very careful what you share with saboteurs, because anything that's shared with saboteurs is ammunition. If you're in any doubt about that, just notice how they treat others. If you're, if your boss is constantly gossiping about other people, then the chances are they'll behave the same way about you. And make sure that, because the problem with the saboteur is if you have them as a boss, they will take credit for your work, for sure. Many of the other types will too, but you can be absolutely sure the saboteur will. The saboteur will even misrepresent your contribution, describe how they sorted out your mess, and before you know it, they're claiming credit for problems that you solved. That's a classic sabotage move with particularly a middle manager as a saboteur. So to counterweight that, just make sure that other people know about your contribution. That is pretty good practice anyway, but it's particularly important if your boss is tendency towards sabotage. Watching time, let's move on. We're going to talk about the client, because many of you here on this call are service providers or independent professionals, as the case may be. Therefore, it'll be the difficult client whom you have no HR department to protect you from. It'll be the difficult client that is high on many agendas. Narcissist. Now, here's the interesting thing. The narcissist as a boss is a nightmare, but the narcissist as a client can be a license to print money. So while you may have difficulty with other types of clients, a narcissist as a client can be a lot of fun. So get ready for a fun ride. Yes, get clear about their vision. Be very clear about your requirements, sure. And here's the important piece: set a very high fee, because you need to be well paid if you're going to deal with narcissists. And then, as long as you've got boundaries around money and scope, etc., use your playfulness and creativity till the cows come home. You really, in almost every walk of life, you can actually make a lot of money out of a narcissist. Now, you might think that's a dreadful thing to say, John, but you have there'll be other clients that you want to have lower fees with. There'll be other clients you want to spend time on. So don't hesitate to engage narcissists as clients. As a boss, they're a nightmare. really bad news, but as a client, do enjoy. Manipulators, on the other hand, be more careful with them, particularly around money and particularly around your fees. As it says in there, get your fees paid up front. You may be tempted, particularly if you're in personal development or coaching or anything to do with human development, you may well be tempted to try to fix the manipulator. Unless you're being paid to do so, brackets quite a lot, I would suggest try to think about where else that energy might go, because it's very easy to waste energy fixing manipulators. Point is, they're game players. So if you get dragged into the game, they are even better at it than you are, and there's more risk of you getting muddy by wrestling with a manipulator than actually achieving any development objective. Aggressive clients. Yes, we've all had them. Key to success here is, again, relationship building, but it's with other stakeholders, if at all possible. Obviously, if there are no other stakeholders, this becomes, you really have to go to point 2, which is boundaries. The only other answer for aggressors is boundaries. For example, about shouting. Body language is important, so is tone of voice, by the way. So your ability to hold eye-to-eye contact, your ability to maintain a calm tone of voice in the face of an aggressive client is important. And really, you want to consider getting rid of them. Whereas there is a rationale for working with narcissists, mainly called money, there is maybe a rationale in coping with manipulators if you can deal with game playing, but there's almost no rationale for working with the aggressive. They are likely to become a problem at some point. They're quite likely to use bluster and threat. A common threat from aggressive clients is they're going to ruin your reputation. Most of them don't have that power. They may well like to think they have, but if you fail to deliver on this, I'm going to tell the whole city about you. Well, in their power stance, they may think they have that level of power. Very few of them do. I've heard that threat mentioned many, many times. Also, of course, the threat of legal action comes up many, many times. But by and large, most aggressors don't actually have the amount of power they think they have. Again, can't advise on specific situations, but aggressors thrive on your fear. So what you really want to do is to start building your sense of self-worth so that you can have clear boundaries, so that you, and most importantly, that you're in a position to get rid of them. The solution to the aggressive client is find a better client. And finally, the saboteur. Again, you will come across them as clients. There are people who will milk you for everything you've got, very often before signing a contract. They are very good at exploiting scope. If, therefore, you have to engage with them, try to get paid as much in advance as you can. A lot of the fee work that I do with professionals is about getting paid in advance. We don't pay for the cinema on the way out, we pay on the way in. And where possible in a B2B environment, building more senior relationships so that you have at least somebody else in there who knows of your contribution. I'm going to have to push on. We still have 2 other types to cover. Third type, colleagues, difficult colleagues. Again, the client, if you're independent, you got some choice over your clients. I guess if you choose to work in a place, you might have some choice over the boss you get, although many of them get foisted on you. But colleagues, on the other hand, we often don't get to control. So therefore, you got to look after yourself. With the narcissist, interrupt them. Don't hesitate to stop the story. Just find reasons why you don't have to sit around being their audience. Boundaries, of course, are important, as already discussed. Detaching from their drama, much as we did with the boss, equally important. Manipulators, the key message here is the third one, not to get sucked into their games. There are a lot of manipulators around, particularly if they occur with the narcissistic trait, that's quite a nasty combination. You get somebody who's attention hungry, but is also a game player. When you get those two types together in a colleague, that can be a real downer on a team. Try to keep your attention, or your collective attention, on common goals rather than their games. And as already discussed, again, make sure that other people know about the value of your work. Aggressive colleagues. Hopefully, I was going to say hopefully you won't have too many problems with them, but actually that's not what happens. There are aggressive colleagues pretty much in many environments. Again, same sequence. Get support first. Point one, establish boundaries, eye contact, clear, calm requests. Again, I would suggest to some extent don't get sucked into their game, and in some cases you just don't want to be alone with them. This, of course, particularly goes for female, for people who have got male aggression, as in sexual aggression in the workplace. There are colleagues you just don't want to get stuck working late with or doing the trip with, etc. Saboteurs, again, be cautious what you share with them, and again, make sure that others know about your contribution. Do you challenge a sabotaging colleague? Sometimes you will, sometimes you won't. Important thing though is don't let your self-worth be dictated by whether you do or whether you don't. I think it's very important to choose the battles that we fight. Yes, there's a comment coming in that these are the traits of the psychopath. Indeed, they are. And I think it's important that we preserve a sense of choice about whether we challenge any of these types or not. You will find no shortage of coaching schools out there urging you to challenge all kinds of dysfunctional behavior around you. My experience with that is it gets very fatiguing. You know, are they worth it? What's the why behind all of this? If you're simply seeking your own validation by challenging people left, right, and center, maybe it would be better to look at why you need all that validation. So let's create a sense of freedom here about whether you challenge dysfunctional people or not. If you choose to do so, go for it. There was a time in my life I went to court every year. I felt I, would not put up with late payers or people who are fraudulent in their behavior or whatever it might be. Team members who lied on the CV, ended up getting jobs and ended up getting fired. No, we don't tolerate that. And if that means you got to go to court, go to court. But it's all very well. It proves you can fight a battle, but note the self-validation going on alongside. I think it's important that we feel a sense of freedom about that. Finally, it's worth remembering that the people that we're working with might be somebody we've hired. That happens. And in this context, I'm not distinguishing between whether they're a staff member or whether they're a supplier. The difficult people aren't always further, above us, let's say, in a hierarchy or further up the food chain in terms of clients. They may well be key employees or key suppliers who could be narcissists. I would love to know if anybody ever comes across a screening process that could screen out narcissists early on. I would love to know of it. While there are many surveys out there about narcissists, and there is a narcissistic personality test, I think it's NPT or something, Google away to your heart's content. Notice the narcissist won't, but unless it's about them. But I would love to know how you could detect a narcissist on a very first conversation. The language is a clue, but sometimes they are, particularly if they have manipulator traits, sometimes they're actually quite good at feeding you what they want you to believe. With the narcissist, ultimately, I think you got to get rid of them. I don't see, fine, they're okay for a short-term engagement, but if it's your team or if it's your supplier, let's face it, a narcissist is never going to be on your agenda or are never going to be on a common agenda. They're always going to be on their own agenda. And I don't know of any formula for changing a narcissist. So, if you find one, let me know. But short term, you can create clear objectives and accountability. Short term, you can refocus attention on a common goal. But if you set your heart and set loads of development priorities around changing a narcissist till they become somebody who's focused on your stuff, then good luck with that. I would say, however, that a narcissist themselves can make that change. I have come across a number of people over the course of 20, 30 years who have themselves decided they wanted to be less narcissistic in their focus, and they learned ways of changing. It's quite exceptional, but it does happen, and it's quite thrilling to watch a self-confessed narcissist actually realize often through a burnout or through a major loss or bereavement, whatever it might be, when a narcissist changes to become somebody who is more common goal oriented, that's actually quite thrilling to watch. It's quite rare, so don't bank on your narcissist being changed. Manipulators, keep them busy. The more busy, the busier they are and the more accountable they are, then the less time they've got to mess around with politics. And again, measure them by what they do, not by what they say. Manipulators are very good at feeding you what you'd like to hear. So they will tell you everything is under control when it's not. Why? Because they know that's the message that you want. So they'll tell you that, and then one day you'll discover it's not under control, and actually, they were busy doing something else. So keep them busy, keep them accountable. Sometimes weekly goals are better than monthly ones, and above all, measure them by what they do and not by what they say. There's a question from Vicky about HR departments. Let's pick that one up separately, Vicky. I think that's a bit involved for for today's webinar, and it's nearly 10 to. Aggressor. Why should you tolerate an aggressive employee or supplier? I mean, unhesitatingly, blunt boundaries, get rid of. I don't have any other advice to offer when it comes to aggressors. They deserve what's coming to them. Saboteurs, again, I think this is a time when we challenge people who are sabotaging others. I think this is a time to challenge them on their behavior. If you're their boss or you're their client, as the case may be, and if they are sabotaging your project, I think it's your job as a manager or as a boss to actually challenge that. And I would add, replace them as soon as you possibly can. Why? Because people who do that are a liability rather than an asset. Look, none of this is easy. This is one of the hardest things in business. So expect to feel some level of dissatisfaction, even with yourself. That's why unconditional loyalty to yourself is the key message in that book in front of you. And enlist support from somewhere, from me if you wish, the diary is there, but also from other people, whether it's a sympathetic person in HR, whether it's somebody else you're doing a course with, whether it's a family member, whatever it might be. Obviously very important when you're dealing with aggressive people, but actually it's important when you're dealing with any of the difficult types that we mentioned earlier. The great thing about self-worth is that you recover more quickly. One of the most tangible benefits of self-worth is resilience. So the recovery that used to take, days, weeks, months, can now happen in a matter of minutes or hours, because we detach from other people's drama. And the guideline here for the people you associate with in the future is focus on people who are interested rather than those trying to be interesting. The problem with many of the types in the earlier pieces, they're trying to be interesting. They're trying to be powerful in some way or other. One of the key distinctions in the book is actually if we start surrounding ourselves with people who are interested rather than trying to be interesting, we end up with a much happier life. And part of that shift in the workplace is, encouraging both ourselves and others to shift from constant self-evaluation to instead, how is it that we can be useful? Yes, there are questions to ask of ourselves. There's a lovely quote from George Bernard Shaw that used to sit in my fridge for years before I lost it in a recent move, that says, never wrestle with a pig in the mud, because the mud smells and the pig loves it. Are you attracting the same type of pig over and over again? Do you find this is the third, fifth, 10th saboteur that you seem to have uncovered, or that seems to have found you? Do you keep getting conned by the manipulative types, or attracting narcissists? And what's that about? Now, I'm not suggesting here that this takes us down a woo route about attraction. Not at all. But perhaps it's worth looking at, how are you coming across when you do your networking, or when you have an interview? Are there certain things you're doing or saying? Is there certain body language that it would be helpful to get rid of? If, for example, you constantly come across as hungry and desperate, with a undying wish to fix everyone around you, then of course that's going to get exploited by narcissists and by manipulative people. So if we are attracting the same type over and over again, whether as clients, whether as bosses, whether as colleagues, or friends for that matter, then perhaps we might want to look at who the common denominator is in the middle of it all. Thanks everyone for your attention. There's more webinars in this series. Have a look on the Self-Worth Academy page. Further detail on coaching courses are still available some places. So have a look on the coaching courses page. And if you'd like some individual support to deal with the many types that we probably didn't get to cover today, either ping me an email, john@selfworthacademy.com, or feel free to have a look at my diary and just book yourself in for a call. Thanks everyone for your participation. Sorry about the technical drama in the in the beginning, and wish you a very good continuation. Bye for now.